Hello everyone. So in this lecture video, we're going to be covering the beginning parts of the nervous system. This is going to be one of many lecture videos that will be covering the nervous system. There are three main functions of the nervous system: collecting information, the processing and evaluating information, and the initiation of response. And if you understand the way this works, is collecting information is called sensory, or the sensory function of the nervous system. That's from sensations, sensations about our position, what we're seeing, right? Then your brain then processes, and sometimes your spinal cord processes this information. And then if we needed to do something about a certain sensory information, we initiate a response. A very quick example again is, because I like to always tell stories about jumping off from a moving car, is let's say again you're going back to the crosswalk again, and you're in this case walking again like calmly across the crosswalk, and what happens is you notice a car coming at a very high rate of speed. That's collecting information. And what is collecting the information? Your eyes, your visual pathway is collecting the information. So then what happens then is this information then goes to your brain. So this is processing and evaluating information, and it tells you this is a threat to your safety. This is a threat to your survival. So in this case then, the brain itself then fires, right? So then, voluntarily speaking, your brain then starts the process of initiating a motor response, in this case running away from this oncoming vehicle. So this is again the three main functions of the nervous system. If things get very confusing about anything that we're going to be talking about this particular module, all you have to think about is these are the three main things. It either belongs to the collecting the information part, it's either in this case belongs to the processing part, or it's initiating a response, okay? Or a pathway will involve definitely all three of them. So again, go back to this three main functions of the nervous system, and you will hopefully not get too confused, okay? So there are two ways, okay? Similar to the joints, there were two ways that you can actually classify joints previously. There are also two ways that you can actually classify the nervous system. The first is similarly to the joints, okay, in this case to articulations, is the structural organization. So everything within the cranium and the vertebral canal is called the central nervous system. So that's the brain and the spinal cord. And everything outside of the central nervous system is called peripheral, meaning outside, which involves nerves and ganglia. Ganglia, by the way, are just collections of cell bodies, neuron cell bodies outside of the spinal cord. Okay, we're going to be talking more about ganglion pretty soon. The second way that you can classify the nervous system is through function. And again, the three main functions of the nervous system, folks, is in this case collecting information, right, evaluating the information, and initiating a response. So here we actually have input, sometimes called the afferent pathway, okay, input, and then we have an output, sometimes called the efferent pathway. Afferent, efferent, input, output. Sensory. There are two sensory divisions. One of them is called somatic sensory, meaning to say, and these sensations in this case, you are aware of the sensations. You can see something, you can feel something, you can taste something. Those are somatic sensations, okay? The other thing is visceral sensory, and these are sensations that is, in this case, very subconscious, which means to say that we do not consciously, in this case, detect this, okay? We do not feel them. We might see, like we might see or hear some byproducts of visceral sensations, but definitely not, we are not aware of this consciously, okay? This is similar to the output portions. There's two ways. There are two ways that you initiate response. One of the ways is called the somatic motor. And the somatic motor nervous system, the efferent somatic motor, okay, is in this case, initiates response to voluntary muscles, which is skeletal muscle, okay? And then the fourth one, which is also part of the motor nervous system, is autonomic motor, okay, the autonomic nervous system. And in this case, these are, processes that we cannot consciously control, okay? So you cannot control your heart rate, right? You may be able to control your respirations for a little bit, but if you hold your breath long enough, you will pass out and your body will take over. Okay? You cannot control your digestion. So all of those things are autonomic motor functions. There are two main cells in the nervous system, and the main cells in the nervous system that actually does all the work are neurons. Okay, so neurons are cells that are specialized in sending, in this case, nerve impulses, or in this case, electrical signals, very, very long distances in your body. Those are called neurons. Okay. However, there's also a second type of cells in the nervous system, and which outnumbers neurons. So glia, or neuroglial cells, actually outnumber neurons. And if you look at, this is hopefully a very, very familiar slide, tissue section for a microscope slide for you folks. If you can see this is a neuron. And neurons are, in this case, typified by all of this extended, extensions, okay, from the cell body called axons. And if you can see all of these little dots, it looks like rabbit poop all over the place. All of these folks are neuroglial cells. Okay. Here, okay, is a cartoon of the relationship between neuroglia or glial cells versus neurons. Okay, so again, neurons do all the work. What they do is, this is the cell body. This is always called the cell body. Then your neuron cell body. Then you have the axon, and then you have dendrites. Dendrites, okay, are extensions of the cell body that communicates with the terminal or the end of the axon of another neuron. So here you can see that there's axons here, like axon terminals, synaptic knobs from this neuron. And as you can see, the point in which these two cells communicate is via the synaptic knobs and the dendrites of a different neuron. The gap between a synaptic knob and a dendrite is called a synapse. Okay, so that is actually the relation between two neurons. And FY folks, neurons are, in this case, are associated with multiple other neurons, sometimes in the thousands. So one neuron can sometimes associate with 1,000 other neurons. Okay, so just imagine how much information is getting into one specific neuron at one time. So this is where the glial cells come into play. So since the neurons are such busy cells, and they're so busy just generating impulses, like deciding whether the message that they're getting from the previous neuron is actually useful. All right. What happens, folks, is they are quite busy. So they have other helper cells that help them actually live. So you actually have, these are babysitters, right? Right. I'm not calling neurons babies, but that's the best analogy I have. Right. And one of the things is astrocytes. Okay, astrocytes, folks, if you want to think about them as all they do is they actually connect, in this case, the neurons to blood. Right. Most of the time, your central nervous, in fact, I shouldn't say most, all the time, your central nervous system is actually, in this case, divided from blood circulation. So what happens, folks, is the glial cells, in this case, the astrocyte, then, in this case, feeds the neurons indirectly. It takes nutrients from the blood and then transport those nutrients to the actual neuron. Okay, what is shown here is actually there's actually other macrophages as well, which are immune cells that actually circulate in the nervous system. All right, and then here you actually have this blue cell called oligodendrocytes. Okay, now there's actually two types of these cells. In the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, they are called oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, they're actually called Schwann cells. And what oligodendrocytes do, or Schwann cells, what they do is they actually create myelin. And myelin, okay, just as an FYI, is this blue sheath that covers the axon or the extensions from the neuron. And the purpose, okay, of this myelin is to actually speed up the electrical impulses that is generated from the neurons throughout to the next, in this case, to the next neuron. Please make a note that two neurons do not make contact with each other. the way that they communicate with each other in this case is through neurotransmitters. So at the synapse, if you see these blue dots in the synapse at the terminal, I cannot find my arrows anymore. What happens, folks, is, see the synapse here, what happens is neurotransmitters actually gets released, and these chemicals, these neurotransmitters, can actually either excite this neuron or inhibit this neuron. Neurotransmitters are not just excitatory, they can also be inhibitory. Okay, so again, oligodendrocytes in this case, myelin is a very important thing, and this is actually where the colors, the gray matter and the white matter comes from. Okay, the gray matter is when in this case, a neuron actually is naked, so when it is not covered with myelin. The reason why you have white matter in the brain and the spinal cord is that white color comes from myelin. Okay, so I hope now other things, the difference between neuroglial cells and neurons is again, obviously neuroglial cells outnumber neurons, is the other thing that neurons have not that glia has is neurons are very rarely undergo mitosis. Okay, neuroglial cells on the other hand, there's a high turnover rate, right? Neuroglial cells die, okay, some new stem cells come up, then you make new neuroglial cells, and then there's actually this bunch of cell divisions, mitosis, that creates more neuroglial cells. Neurons, on the other hand, most of the time is they are fixed, and there are, we're still having a debate about whether neurons remain the same number as when you're born, or if you still have the same neurons as you have when you were born, all the way to death. There's still some debate about that, but now we know that there's some initial evidence that suggests that neurons actually in this case do undergo mitosis. Okay, it's not yet fully explained, but that's the case. All right, so again, very important. A very interesting thing about neurons, okay, and I'm gonna give you this as a good tidbit of information, is you actually have more neurons when you're younger than when you're older. And what happens is, as you get older, the number of neurons, okay, and the number of connections between neurons actually get trimmed. That process is called pruning. If you think about like a tree and you chop down branches from a tree, that's called pruning. And the time in which pruning eventually ceases is actually around 25 years old. Okay, and this is one of the reasons why your insurance rates go down around, in this case, at the age of 25. And the reason why is like insurance companies, actuarial scientists believe that at that point you already create the lowest risk. And now you might be asking, why don't you wish that you have more neurons? Which means to say that you decide better, that you actually have better decision-making skills. Actually, that's actually not correct. What happens, folks, is I want you to think about like if you happen to like go into let's say into a stop sign, right? If you only have a left and right, okay, if it's a one, like in this case, if you only have to left and right, the decisions that you make is very easy. Do I make a left? Do I make a right? Okay, that's what happens when you're older, when you don't have a lot of connections between neurons, okay, relatively speaking. When you're younger, when you go into a stop sign, you have like 500 different turns that you can take. So in this case, there's confusion. Your brain says, well, do I go left? Do I go somewhat left? Do I go to the street that goes slightly that way or this way? And again, that's the reason why when you're younger, it takes a longer time for you to actually make decisions, which means to say that this is where the risk comes from. All right. This is a very simplistic lecture, but again, know the three main functions of the nervous system. Okay. Know the structural divisions, and definitely know the functional divisions of the nervous system.